The chains rattled against the metal floor as Wraith shifted his weight. Every eye in the Imperial Court watched him, waiting for him to speak, to defend himself, to beg for mercy. He could do none of those things. The young Draconian stood with his head lowered, scales dulled by months of confinement, wings folded tight against his back. His throat worked uselessly, the way it had his entire life, producing nothing but silence. High Adjudicator Vren circled the defendant's platform like a predator. His crystalline body refracted the harsh courtroom lights into rainbow shards that danced across the walls. The accused stands before us charged with destruction of property valued at 40,000 credits and assault resulting in injury. The evidence is clear. The merchant stall was completely destroyed. His son suffered burns across 30% of his body. And this creature offers no defense, no explanation, no remorse. Magistrate Olwen shifted on her elevated seat, her dozen tentacles moving in patterns that Wraith had learned meant she was growing impatient. The judicial chamber of Andrus 7 had hosted thousands of trials, but few as straightforward as this one appeared to be. A violent Draconian with no voice to plead his case, caught in an act of destruction. The outcome seemed inevitable. Court Advocate Solace, does your client wish to enter a plea? Olwen's voice echoed through the chamber. Solace, a thin reptilian being with tired eyes, barely glanced at Wraith. Magistrate, my client is unable to communicate verbally due to a genetic defect. I enter a plea of guilty with diminished capacity on his behalf. Murmurs rippled through the gallery. Wraith's claws scraped against the platform. He wanted to scream that it was a lie, that he was not guilty, that they had not heard the full story. But his damaged vocal cords produced nothing. They never had. From the moment he hatched, he had been silent, and his own kind had cast him out for it. The prosecution recommends neural reconditioning, Vren announced, his voice sharp with satisfaction. This being is clearly a danger to civilized society. Without the ability to express intent or remorse, he cannot be rehabilitated through conventional means. We must ensure he never harms another citizen. Neural reconditioning. Wraith knew what that meant. They would erase everything that made him himself, turn him into an empty shell that followed commands without thought or feeling. It was not death, but something far worse. His whole body began to tremble. The bailiff, a massive insectoid with armor plating and cold compound eyes, noticed the movement. He activated his shock prod and jabbed it into Wraith's side. Pain exploded through his ribs. Wraith jerked, but made no sound, because he could not. The courtroom observers nodded approvingly at what they assumed was submission. Very well, Magistrate Olwen began, raising her primary appendage. Given the evidence presented and the defendant's inability to offer testimony in his own defense, this court finds weight. The single word cut through the formal proceeding like a blade. Every head turned toward the gallery. A human stood there, average height, wearing the plain gray coveralls of a spaceport maintenance worker. His dark hair was touched with gray at the temples, and his face showed the weathered lines of someone who had seen hardship but not surrendered to it. I have something to say, the human continued, his voice steady despite the hundreds of alien eyes now fixed on him. The guards moved toward him immediately. Magistrate Olwen raised a tentacle to stop them, her curiosity apparently stronger than her irritation. This court does not recognize random outbursts from spectators. Identify yourself and state your business quickly or be removed. My name is David Wright. I work at the Central Spaceport, and I witnessed the incident at the market 3 weeks ago. The official report is wrong. Vren's crystalline form seemed to sharpen. Magistrate, this is highly irregular. Humans have no standing in consortium legal proceedings. This individual is clearly attempting to delay justice. David pulled a small data card from his pocket. Provision 47 of the consortium charter states that any sentient being may present material evidence in capital cases. Neural reconditioning is considered a capital punishment under Articles 12 through 15. I have evidence that directly contradicts the charges. Magistrate Olwen's tentacles curled in what Wraith had learned was the equivalent of a frown. She consulted with two advisors who floated near her bench, their whispered conversation lasting nearly a minute. Finally, she spoke. The human is correct. Provision 47 does apply. You may present your evidence, David Wright. But be warned, if you are wasting this court's time, there will be consequences. David walked down from the gallery, his footsteps echoing in the sudden silence. He approached the central platform, and for the first time, he looked directly at Wraith. Their eyes met. The human's expression was not one of pity or disgust, but something Wraith had rarely seen directed at him: recognition. As if David saw a person standing there, not a broken thing. I was mapping infrastructure conduits near the market that day, David explained, holding up the data card. My scanner automatically records visual data for reference. I did not realize it had captured the incident until I reviewed my files later and recognized the defendant from the news reports. And what does this recording show? Vren demanded. David inserted the card into the court's display system. A holographic image materialized above the center of the chamber, showing the market square from an elevated angle. The timestamp showed 3 weeks prior, mid-afternoon. The image quality was grainy but functional, clearly meant for technical work rather than security purposes. Watch, David said simply. The recording showed Wraith moving through the market's edge, carrying containers of waste from the restaurants toward the disposal units. A group of young aliens, maybe 5 or 6 of them, noticed him. One pointed, another laughed. They began following him, throwing small objects. Wraith tried to move faster, to ignore them, but they surrounded him. The merchant's son, a bulky creature with 4 arms, grabbed a container from his father's stall. The label on the side clearly marked it as containing industrial solvent, highly flammable. He shook it at Wraith, taunting. Then he threw it. The container struck Wraith in the chest and shattered. The liquid splashed across his scales. The young aliens were laughing, shoving closer. Wraith backed away, cornered against a wall. One of them grabbed his wing and pulled hard enough that even through the silent recording, observers could see Wraith's body jerk in pain. That was when Wraith's survival instincts took over. He breathed fire, a short defensive burst meant to make them back away. But the solvent on his scales ignited instantly. The flames spread to the puddle on the ground, racing back to the merchant's stall where more containers sat. The explosion was immediate and devastating. The recording showed Wraith trying to help, trying to pull injured aliens away from the flames, until the authorities arrived and tackled them to the ground. The hologram faded. The courtroom sat in stunned silence. Self-defense, David said quietly. He was attacked. He responded with the only defense his species has. And when others were hurt, he tried to help them, even though they had just tormented him for their entertainment. Vren recovered quickly. This changes nothing. The defendant still destroyed property and caused injuries. His inability to communicate his intentions makes him unpredictable and dangerous. How can we trust a being who cannot explain himself, who cannot express regret, who cannot participate in his own defense? David turned to face the prosecutor directly. You want to erase him because he makes you uncomfortable, because you do not want to make the effort to understand him. I want to protect society from a clear threat, Vren shot back. No, David said, his voice hardening. You want to eliminate someone who is different, someone who does not fit your narrow definition of acceptable. He walked toward Wraith, moving slowly, carefully. The bailiff raised his shock prod in warning, but Magistrate Olwyn gestured for him to wait. David stopped a few feet from the Draconian and did something that shocked every observer in the chamber, but he smiled. Not a pitying smile, not a condescending one. A genuine smile of greeting, the kind you offer a neighbor or a colleague. Then he spoke directly to Wraith, his voice gentle but clear. Can you understand me? Wraith, surprised, nodded. Good, David said. Then let me help you tell your story. David pulled his personal tablet from his coverall pocket, the screen lighting up with a soft glow. The device was old, scratched from years of use, but worked perfectly. He held it where Wraith could see and began typing with quick, practiced fingers. Can you read standard consortium script? Appeared on the screen. Wraith stared at the words for a moment, then nodded again, more emphatically this time. His golden eyes, which had been dull with resignation, just minutes before, showed the first spark of something else. Hope, perhaps, or simply the shock of being acknowledged as capable of thought. David typed again. Tell me what happened. Use gestures. I will translate for the court. The murmurs in the gallery grew louder. Vren stepped forward, his crystalline body flashing with agitation. Magistrate, this is absurd. The human cannot possibly interpret random gestures as legal testimony. He has no training, no certification, no authority to speak for the defendant. The human is not speaking for the defendant, Magistrate Olwen said, her multiple eyes fixed on David and Wraith with an intensity that had not been there before. He is providing a means for the defendant to speak for himself. There is precedent for translator services in consortium courts. Continue, David Wright. But know that false testimony carries severe penalties. I understand, David said. He turned back to Wraith and typed. Start from the beginning. Where were you when this started? Wraith's clawed hands moved hesitantly at first. He pointed to himself, then made a lifting motion, then pointed to the hologram display where the market scene was frozen. David watched carefully, asking clarifying questions through the tablet. Slowly, haltingly, they established a rhythm of communication. He says he was working his regular shift at waste collection, David told the court. He finishes his route at the market every day around the same time. He has done this job for 8 months without incident. Wraith continued with his gestures, becoming more confident as David proved able to follow. His hands shaped the story, and David gave it voice. The group of young people had bothered him before. Small things. Calling out words he could not respond to. Blocking his path briefly, then moving. He ignored it because responding would only make it worse. But that day, they were more aggressive. The Draconian's movements became sharper, more agitated as he recounted the harassment. His wings twitched, spreading slightly before folding tight again. They surrounded him. He tried to leave, but they would not let him pass. One grabbed his wing and pulled hard. It hurt. Draconians use their wings for balance and temperature regulation. Damaging them can cause permanent injury. Solace, the court-appointed advocate who had barely defended Wraith minutes ago, leaned forward in his seat. He had not known any of this. He had assumed his client was simply unable to provide information, not that no one had bothered to ask. David continued translating. When a merchant's son threw the solvent, he did not know what it was at first. But the smell was chemical, strong. It burned his scales. The young people were laughing. They thought it was funny. Then one of them lit a small flame near him, threatening to ignite the solvent while it was still on his body. The courtroom had gone completely silent now. Even Vren had stopped his pacing. He breathed fire to scare them away. Just a small burst, aimed at the ground to make them back up. He did not know the solvent had created a trail leading back to the stall. When the explosion happened, he was thrown backward. His first thought when he recovered was to help. 2 of the young people were injured. He pulled them away from the flames. That is when the authorities arrived and saw him standing over them. Wraith lowered his hands. His whole body was shaking again, but this time not from fear. The memories were clearly painful, made worse by months of being unable to share them, being assumed guilty because he could not scream his innocence. David typed one more message. Is there anything else the court should know? Wraith's response was a series of gestures that made David's jaw tighten. He took a breath before translating. He says that the merchant's son was not charged with assault or reckless endangerment, even though the solvent was taken from his father's stall without permission and used as a weapon. He says that none of the others who participated in the harassment were questioned. He says that when he was arrested, the guards beat him because they assumed his silence meant he was resisting. He was not resisting. He simply could not beg them to stop. Magistrate Olwen's tentacles had gone completely still. High Adjudicator Vren, did you investigate the other individuals involved in this incident? Vren's confident demeanor cracked slightly. The investigation focused on the primary actor. The defendant's actions caused the explosion and the injuries. The others were victims of his violence. They were participants in assault, David said, his voice sharp with controlled anger. And you know it. You just did not want to do the work of finding out the truth when you had an easy target who could not defend himself. How dare you accuse me of? I accuse you of exactly what you are guilty of, David interrupted. Laziness disguised as justice. You saw someone different, someone vulnerable, and you decided he was disposable. The gallery erupted in shouts, some supporting David, others condemning him. Magistrate Olwyn called for order, her tentacles slamming against her bench with enough force to crack the wood. Silence. The command echoed through the chamber, amplified by the room's acoustics. When quiet finally returned, she fixed her gaze on Vren. You will provide a full list of all individuals present at the incident within 24 hours. They will be questioned. If this court finds that evidence was deliberately omitted or suppressed, there will be consequences. Vren's crystalline body seemed to dim. He gave a curt nod, but the magistrate was not finished. She turned to David. You have successfully demonstrated that the defendant is capable of communication and that the incident may have been misrepresented. However, this creates a new problem. The original charges may be dismissed or reduced, but that does not resolve the larger issue. What issue? David asked, though he suspected he knew. Wraith has no family. His own species rejected him. He has no community support, no resources beyond his menial job. Even if this court releases him today, what future does he have? How does he navigate a galaxy where most communication is verbal? How does he advocate for himself when a next crisis occurs? How does he survive? It was a fair question, and David saw where this was leading. Magistrate Olwyn was not cruel, but she was practical. She could not simply release Wraith into a society that had already failed him once. The court has a responsibility, Olwyn continued, to ensure that beings under its jurisdiction are not placed in situations where they are likely to come to harm or cause it. Without support systems, Wraith will inevitably face another incident like this. The outcome may be worse next time. Vren seized the opening, which is why custodial supervision remains the appropriate solution. Not neural reconditioning, perhaps, given the new information, but a supervised facility where he can be monitored and protected. You mean imprisoned? David said quietly. I mean provided for, Vren countered. He would have food, shelter, medical care. He would be safe. David looked at Wraith. The Draconian's eyes had gone dull again. Safe. The word had likely been used before to justify every cage he had ever been put in, every restriction placed on his freedom. Safe for whom? David wondered. Wraith or everyone else? He made a decision that he knew would change his life completely. There's another option, David said, his voice clear and steady. I will take responsibility for him. I will serve as his legal guardian and sponsor. The courtroom exploded into chaos once more. But David kept his eyes on Wraith and saw the Draconian staring back at him with an expression of disbelief so profound it was almost painful to witness. Magistrate Olwyn raised her tentacles for silence. When she spoke, her voice was measured. David Wright. Do you understand what you are proposing? Yes, David said simply. Ido. Explain to this court why you believe you are qualified for such a responsibility. David took a breath. This was the moment that mattered. Not just for Wraith, but for what it meant about who humans were and what they stood for. Because, he began, my daughter cannot hear. And I have spent 10 years learning that different is not the same as deficient. The words hung in the air like a challenge. David stood in the center of the courtroom, aware that every being present was now evaluating him differently. No longer just an interfering maintenance worker, but a father speaking about his child. Your daughter is deaf, Magistrate Olwyn asked, her tone shifting to something almost gentle. Yes, she was born that way. For the first few years of her life on Earth, I watched people treat her like she was broken, like she was less intelligent because she could not hear them, like she was a burden. David's hands clenched briefly at his sides. Then my wife died, and I had to raise Amy alone. I learned sign language. I learned to advocate. I learned to build systems that worked for her instead of demanding she change to fit a world that was not designed with her in mind. He gestured toward Wraith. This is the same situation. Wraith is not broken. He is not stupid. He is not dangerous. He is simply someone who communicates differently, living in a society that has decided his way is wrong, and therefore he is disposable. Vren made a sound like grinding glass. Your emotional appeal is touching, but irrelevant. You're a single parent working a low-wage job in substandard housing. You can barely support yourself and one child. How exactly do you plan to add a full-grown draconian to your household? Do you have any idea how much they eat? The temperature requirements? The spatial needs? I will figure it out, David said flatly. The same way I figured out how to afford a visual alarm system for Amy. The same way I figured out how to get her enrolled in school when they said they had no accommodations for deaf students. The same way I figure out everything, one problem at a time. And if you fail, Vren pressed, if your noble intentions crumble under the reality of what you are proposing, what happens to Wraith then? David met the prosecutor's faceted gaze without flinching. Then I will have tried, which is more than anyone else has done for him. Magistrate Olwen shifted on her bench, consulting quietly with her advisors. The whispered conversation stretched for several minutes while the courtroom waited. Wraith had not moved, still standing in the defendant's circle, his eyes fixed on David with an intensity that suggested he was barely breathing. Finally, Olwen spoke. The law does permit guardianship arrangements across species. However, they're extremely rare and require significant oversight. If this court were to approve such an arrangement, it would come with strict conditions. I accept whatever conditions you require, David said immediately. You have not heard them yet. It does not matter. Whatever they are, I accept them. Olwen's tentacles curled in what might have been amusement or exasperation. Very well. First, Wraith would be required to wear a monitoring device at all times. It will track his location and vital signs. Any sign of distress or unusual activity will alert the authorities immediately. David nodded. He did not like the idea of Wraith being tracked like a criminal, but he understood the court's need for assurance. Second, you will submit monthly reports detailing Wraith's living conditions, employment status, health, and general well-being. These reports will be reviewed by a social services officer. Understood. Third, and most importantly, you will undergo a formal competency evaluation within 30 days. This evaluation will test your knowledge of draconian physiology, your ability to provide adequate care, your communication systems, and your crisis management skills. The evaluation is comprehensive and rigorous. It was designed for professional caregivers and social workers, not maintenance technicians. Vren was smiling now, his crystalline features reflecting light in sharp, triumphant angles. He knew the evaluation. He had seen trained professionals fail it. If you fail the evaluation, Olwen continued, the guardianship will be immediately revoked and Wraith will be remanded to a custodial facility. There will be no second chances. Do you still wish to proceed? David felt the weight of the decision pressing down on him. 30 days to learn everything required to pass an evaluation designed for experts. 30 days while working full shifts, caring for Amy, and helping Wraith adjust to an entirely new life. The odds were stacked impossibly against him. He looked at Wraith again. The draconian was trembling, his claws scraping nervously against the metal platform. How many times had this being been promised, something only to have it ripped away? How many times had he allowed himself to hope before being crushed? I wish to proceed, David said. Magistrate Olwen studied him for a long moment, then nodded slowly. Very well. This court hereby dismisses the original charges against Wraith, pending further investigation into the incident. Wraith is released into the guardianship of David Wright under the conditions stated. The evaluation will take place in exactly 30 days. She brought her primary tentacle down on the bench with a resounding crack. This court is adjourned. The bailiff approached Wraith with a device that locked around the draconian's wrist, a thin band that glowed with a soft blue light. The chains were removed, clattering to the floor. Wraith stood there, free but monitored, and seemed unsure what to do next. David walked over to him. Come on, let's go home. Wraith followed him out of the courtroom, moving hesitantly, as if expecting someone to stop them at any moment. The gallery had emptied, but clusters of aliens stood in the corridor outside, watching them pass. Some looked curious. Others looked hostile. One spat on the floor as they walked by. David ignored them all. He led Wraith through the court complex and out into the streets of Andros 7. The planet's twin suns were setting, casting long purple shadows across the buildings. The air smelled of ozone and exotic vegetation. They walked in silence for several blocks. Wraith kept glancing at David, then looking away, as if he could not quite believe this was happening. Finally, David stopped and pulled out his tablet. "I know you are confused," he typed. "I know you do not understand why I'm doing this. Honestly, I'm not entirely sure myself. But I saw you in that courtroom, and I saw my daughter. I saw what happens when people decide someone is not worth the effort of understanding. I cannot let that stand." Wraith read the message, then looked at David for a long time. Slowly, carefully, he reached out one clawed hand and placed it on David's shoulder. The gesture was gentle, despite the razor-sharp talons. It was a touch that said thank you in a language that needed no words. David smiled. "You are welcome. Now come on. We have a lot of work to do, and only 30 days to do it." They continued walking toward the residential district where David's apartment was located. The buildings here were older, showing signs of wear and neglect. This was not the nice part of town. This was where people lived when they had more bills than income, more problems than solutions. David's apartment was on the 4th floor of a building that had seen better decades. The elevator was broken, as usual, so they climbed the stairs. Wraith moved carefully, his wings brushing against the narrow walls that tee the door. David paused. "I should warn you, the apartment is small, very small, and my daughter is going to have a lot of questions." He opened the door to reveal 2 rooms that could generously be called cozy and more accurately described as cramped. A combination living area and kitchen took up most of the space. A single bedroom was visible through an open doorway. The furniture was mismatched but clean, and the walls were covered with drawings that could only have been made by a child that a girl sat at the small table, working on homework. She had dark hair like David's and bright, intelligent eyes. When she saw them enter, she looked up, and her eyes went very wide. David moved where she could see his hands and began signing. His movements were fluid and practiced, the language of someone who had been using it for years. Amy watched his hands, then looked at Wraith and back at David's hands. She stood up slowly and approached Wraith, tilting her head to study him. The Draconian lowered himself into a crouch, making himself smaller and less intimidating. Amy reached out tentatively and touched one of his scales. It was warm beneath her fingers. She turned to David and signed something. David smiled and nodded, then typed on his tablet to show Wraith. "She says you're beautiful and asks if you're staying with us." Wraith looked at this small human child who could not hear, who communicated with her hands the way he was learning to, who looked at him and saw beauty instead of a monster. His eyes began to leak moisture, clear fluid running down his scaled cheeks. David recognized it from his hasty research during the trial. Draconians cried, but they had no tear ducts like humans. The moisture seeped directly through their scales. It meant Wraith was experiencing emotions too strong to contain. Amy saw the tears and did something that shocked even David. She hugged Wraith, wrapping her small arms around his neck. The Draconian froze for a moment, then very carefully, very gently, returned the embrace with one arm, mindful of his claws. David watched them and felt the weight of what he had committed to settling fully onto his shoulders. 30 days. He had 30 days to learn enough to pass an evaluation designed to make him fail. 30 days to prove that compassion and determination could overcome impossible odds. He looked at his daughter, hugging a dragon that the galaxy had thrown away, and he knew that failure was not an option. Whatever it took, he would find a way, because some things were worth fighting for, even when the fight seemed unwinnable. The first night was difficult. Wraith refused the bed David offered, instead curling up in the corner of the living area with his wings wrapped around himself. David left blankets nearby, but did not push. He understood that trust took time, especially for someone who had been betrayed by every system meant to protect him. Amy fell asleep quickly in the bedroom she now shared with her father, leaving David alone with his tablet and a mounting sense of what he had gotten himself into. He searched through the consortium databases for information on draconian care requirements, guardianship law, and anything else that might help him prepare for the evaluation. The list was overwhelming. Draconians needed a high-protein diet with specific mineral supplements. They required temperatures between 25 and 30 degrees Celsius. They needed space to spread their wings daily or risk muscle atrophy. They were prone to respiratory infections if humidity levels dropped too low. The medical considerations alone filled dozens of pages. Then there were the legal requirements. He needed to understand interspecies rights, accommodation laws, emergency protocols, and cultural sensitivity guidelines. The evaluation would cover all of it. David rubbed his eyes and kept reading. Sleep could wait. When dawn broke through the single window, he found Wraith awake and watching him. The Draconian had not moved from his corner all night. David pulled out his tablet and typed a message. "Did you sleep?" Wraith shook his head. "Are you hungry?" A hesitant nod. David stood and went to the small kitchen area. He had no idea what Draconians ate, so he made a simple breakfast of eggs and toast, then added some of the dried meat he kept for emergencies. He set the plate in front of Wraith and stepped back. Wraith stared at the food for a long moment before eating. He used his claws carefully, clearly trying not to make a mess. When he finished, he looked at David with an expression that might have been gratitude. Amy emerged from the bedroom, already dressed for school. She signed good morning to both of them, then grabbed a nutrition bar in her bag. David walked her to the door, signing reminders about her afternoon schedule. She hugged him, waved to Wraith, and left. David turned back to Wraith and pulled out his tablet again. "I need to go to work. You can stay here. The door will lock automatically. There is food in the cooler if you get hungry. I will be back this afternoon." Wraith's eyes widened, and he shook his head vigorously. His hands moved in frantic gestures that David struggled to interpret. "You do not want to stay here alone." Wraith nodded, then gestured toward the door, toward David, then to himself. "You want to come with me?" Another nod. David hesitated. Taking Wraith to the spaceport was risky. People there knew David, knew Amy. They might not react well to seeing him with a Draconian, especially one wearing a monitoring bracelet. But leaving Wraith alone in an unfamiliar place after one night seemed cruel. "All right," David decided, "but you stay close to me. If anyone gives you trouble, you walk away and find me. Understand?" Wraith nodded firmly. They took the transit line to the spaceport, riding in the back car where there was more space. Other passengers stared but said nothing. The monitoring bracelet on Wraith's wrist glowed visibly, marking him as someone under legal supervision. It was meant to provide reassurance to the public, but David suspected it had the opposite effect. AT the spaceport. David's supervisor took one look at Wraith and pulled David into his office. "What is that thing doing here?" "His name is Wraith. He is under my legal guardianship. He is here because I need to supervise him while I work." The supervisor, a stocky alien with too many eyes, shook his head. "I cannot have a Draconian wandering around the maintenance areas. It is a liability. He will not wander. He will help me." "Help you?" "Right, he's a convict. That bracelet means he is dangerous. That bracelet means he is being monitored. There is a difference. And technically, his conviction was overturned. He is not a criminal. Then why the bracelet?" "Because the legal system is overcautious, and I need to prove I can care for him properly." David kept his voice level professional. "Give us one day. If there are any problems, I will make other arrangements. But I think you will find he is useful." The supervisor grumbled, but agreed, mostly because David was one of his most reliable workers and finding a replacement would be difficult. David led Wraith to the maintenance bay, where they kept tools and equipment. He showed Wraith what he did, explaining each task through a combination of demonstration and tablet messages. Cleaning coolant filters, replacing worn seals, checking power conduits for signs of degradation. Wraith watched everything intently. When David gestured for him to try removing a filter housing, Wraith grasped it carefully. His claws, which looked dangerous and clumsy, proved to be remarkably precise. He had the housing open in seconds, something that usually took David several minutes. "Good," David said aloud, then typed the same word on his tablet so Wraith could see it. They worked through the morning. David quickly discovered that Wraith was not only willing but genuinely skilled at mechanical work. His strength made heavy lifting easy, and his fire breath proved incredibly useful for welding and heat-treating metal components. Tasks that would have taken David hours were completed in minutes. Other workers noticed. Some approached cautiously, asking questions. David introduced Wraith each time, explaining his situation simply and directly. Most people remained wary, but a few offered tentative greetings. During lunch break, David found a message on his personal communicator. It was from someone named Bryn, a speech therapist who had worked with Amy at her school. The message said she had heard about David's situation and wanted to help. David called her back immediately. Bryn appeared on the screen, a slender alien with 4 arms and kind eyes. I heard through Amy's teacher that you took in a nonverbal draconian. That is incredibly brave, or incredibly stupid. I have not decided which yet. Bryn laughed. Probably both. Listen, I specialize in alternative communication methods. I have worked with dozens of species and communication challenges. I might be able to help you develop better systems for Wraith, and maybe help you prepare for that evaluation. David felt something unfamiliar in his chest. Hope, maybe, or relief at not being completely alone in this. I would appreciate any help you can offer. Come by the clinic after work. Bring Wraith. We will start figuring this out. True to her word, Bryn spent 2 hours that evening working with Wraith. She tested his comprehension, his vision, his fine motor control. She introduced basic sign language, showed him how to use more advanced features on a communication tablet, and even explored whether he could produce any sounds through means other than his damaged vocal cords. He can drum, she discovered, after Wraith nervously tapped his claws on the table in a rhythmic pattern. Some species use percussion as communication. We could develop a simple code. By the time they left the clinic, Wraith had learned a dozen signs and had a tablet programmed with common phrases and emergency alerts. It was a start. The days that followed fell into a rhythm. David worked at the spaceport with Wraith helping him. They visited Bryn 3 times a week for communication training. In the evenings, David studied for the evaluation while Amy taught Wraith sign language through games and drawings. Wraith slowly came out of his shell. He started sleeping on the couch instead of the corner. He began initiating communication instead of just responding. He even smiled, a draconian expression that involved a slight parting of his jaw and a brightening of his eyes. But there were setbacks too. One evening, a neighbor complained about having a draconian in the building, claiming Wraith made her feel unsafe. The building manager came to David's door with an eviction notice. David fought it, citing housing discrimination laws, but the stress wore on all of them. Wraith retreated into silence for 2 days, convinced he was ruining David's life. Then there was the incident at Amy's school. Another child's parents saw Wraith picking Amy up and filed a complaint with the school board, demanding that creatures under legal supervision not be allowed near children. The school called a meeting. David brought documentation, character references, and Bryn, who testified to Wraith's gentle nature and progress. The complaint was dismissed, but the damage was done. Amy came home with questions about why people were afraid of Wraith when he had never hurt anyone. Through it all, David kept studying. He memorized draconian physiology. He learned proper nutrition guidelines. He practiced crisis scenarios and emergency protocols. Bryn helped him prepare mock evaluations, asking the kinds of questions she thought would appear. The 30 days passed faster than seemed possible. David barely slept, surviving on coffee and determination. Wraith had grown visibly healthier, his scales brighter, his movements more confident. Amy had gained a protective older sibling who walked her to school and helped with homework. The night before the evaluation, David sat on the couch with his tablet, reviewing notes for the 100th time. Wraith sat down beside him and gently took the tablet away. He typed a message. "You have done enough. Sleep. Whatever happens tomorrow, thank you for trying." David read the message and felt his eyes burn with exhaustion and emotion. "I'm not just trying. I'm going to pass. Because you deserve a life, Wraith. A real one, not locked away in a facility. And I promised I would help you get it." Wraith placed his hand on David's shoulder, the same gesture he had used that first day. David covered it with his own hand, and they sat together in the quiet apartment, 2 beings from different worlds who had found something rare and precious in each other. Tomorrow would determine if that was enough. The evaluation center was located in a government building downtown, sterile and imposing. David arrived exactly on time, with Wraith walking beside him. The Draconian was nervous, his tail twitching in short, sharp movements, but he kept his head up. They were met by 3 evaluators in a conference room. The lead evaluator was Counselor Finn, a tall avian being with sharp eyes and sharper features. The other 2 were a mammalian alien named Reed and a being whose species David could not immediately identify, who went by Counselor Tal. David Wright. Finn said, her voice crisp and professional. You are here to demonstrate your competency as a guardian for Wraith of the Draconian species. This evaluation will last approximately 4 hours and will cover multiple domains of care. You may use notes for specific details like medical dosages, but we expect you to demonstrate practical knowledge, not simply memorization. Do you understand? I understand, David said. Then let us begin. Section 1. Basic care requirements. Tell me the optimal temperature range for a Draconian and what happens if those parameters are not met. David took a breath and began. Draconians require ambient temperatures between 25 and 30 degrees Celsius. Below 20 degrees, their metabolism slows significantly, leading to lethargy, digestive problems, and increased susceptibility to respiratory infections. Above 35 degrees for extended periods, they risk heat stress, which can cause organ damage. How have you addressed this in your living space? I installed a zone heater in the area where Wraith sleeps. I also adjusted my building's climate controls for our unit, which required negotiating with the building manager and agreeing to cover the additional energy costs. Finn made a note. Nutritional requirements. What does a healthy Draconian diet consist of? For the next hour, they peppered him with questions. Dietary needs, sleep patterns, wing care, scale maintenance, signs of common illnesses. David answered each one, sometimes pulling up specific data on his tablet for exact measurements, but demonstrating he understood not just the facts but the reasoning behind them. Then they moved to Section 2, Communication Systems. Demonstrate how Wraith communicates basic needs. Reed instructed. David pulled out the tablet and showed them the interface Bryn had helped design. He explained the sign language they were developing, the drumming code for simple alerts, and the visual cues Wraith used to express emotion. Show us, Finn said. David turned to Wraith and signed a question. Wraith responded with his own signs, then drummed a short pattern on the table. David interpreted both. He says he is nervous but trusts the process. The drumming pattern is his code for affirmation or agreement. Counselor Tal leaned forward. How do you handle emergency situations where rapid communication is critical? Wraith's tablet has an emergency function that can be activated with a single claw tap. It sends his location and a distress signal to my communicator and to emergency services. We also established a system where specific drumming patterns indicate different types of emergencies: medical, threat, fire, or other. Have you tested these systems? Yes. We ran drills weekly to ensure they work and that Wraith remembers them under stress. The evaluators exchanged glances. Finn made another note. Section 3 covered legal knowledge and rights. They asked about accommodation laws, discrimination protections, and Wraith's legal status as a ward. David answered each question clearly, citing specific statutes and explaining how they applied to their situation. Then came Section 4, Crisis Management Scenarios. Wraith is involved in an altercation with another individual who does not understand. He is nonverbal and interprets his silence as aggression. The situation is escalating. What do you do? David thought carefully before answering. First, I physically position myself between Wraith and the other individual to de-escalate through presence. I verbally explain that Wraith cannot speak and that there is a misunderstanding. I offer to have Wraith communicate through his tablet to clarify the situation. If the individual remains aggressive, I contact authorities and have Wraith's legal documentation ready to show he is under guardianship and not a threat. Throughout, I keep my own demeanor calm to avoid making the situation worse. Wraith accidentally injures someone, even though it was unintentional. What are your legal obligations? I must immediately report the incident to the monitoring authority listed in his guardianship agreement. I must ensure the injured party receives medical attention and cooperate fully with any investigation. I must also document Wraith's perspective on what happened and gather any evidence that supports his account. Failure to report would violate the guardianship terms and could result in immediate revocation. They continued with scenarios, each one designed to test not just knowledge, but judgment. What if Wraith became ill? What if he wanted to travel off-planet? What if the guardianship became too difficult to maintain? David answered each one honestly, admitting when he was unsure, but explaining how he would find the correct information or seek appropriate help. Finally, they reached the last section, home assessment. We will now visit your residence to evaluate the living conditions, Finn announced. David felt his stomach drop. His apartment was clean, but it was small and clearly not designed for someone of Wraith's size. He nodded anyway. Of course. They all took a transit car to David's building. The evaluators walked through the apartment methodically, measuring spaces, checking the temperature controls David had installed, examining where Wraith slept and ate. Finn opened the cooler and reviewed the food stored there. She checked the bathroom to see if there was adequate space for Wraith to maintain hygiene. She even looked at the fire safety equipment, noting that David had installed extra extinguishers and heat-resistant panels near where Wraith practiced controlled fire breathing. Reed paused at the wall covered in Amy's drawings. Many of them now featured a dragon alongside the stick figures of a man and a girl. Your daughter lives here as well? Yes. She shares the bedroom with me, so Wraith has more space in the living area. How has she adapted to having Wraith here? Better than I have, David admitted. She and Wraith communicate easily because they both use sign language. She teaches him new signs every day. They have become close. As if summoned by the discussion, the door opened and Amy walked in, home from school. She stopped when she saw the strangers, then looked to David with a questioning expression. David signed an explanation. Amy nodded, then walked over to Wraith and signed a greeting. Wraith signed back, and Amy smiled. She pulled out her homework and sat at the table, completely comfortable with a large draconian sitting beside her. Counselor Tal watched the interaction with interest. They seemed very comfortable with each other. Wraith walks her to school every morning and picks her up every afternoon, David said. He helps her with homework, especially math. Turns out draconians have an excellent head for numbers. The evaluators spent another 20 minutes in the apartment, asking questions and observing. Then they announced they had seen enough and would deliver their decision within 24 hours. After they left, David sank onto the couch, exhausted. Wraith sat beside him, and Amy climbed up on his other side. How do you think it went? Amy signed. David signed back. I do not know. I did my best. They sat together in silence for a while. Then Amy's tablet chimed with a homework reminder. She groaned and went to work on her assignment. Wraith helped her, using his own tablet to show her how to solve a problem she was stuck on. David watched them and realized something. Regardless of what the evaluators decided, this had already become a family. Maybe not a conventional one. Maybe not one that fit neatly into society's expectations. But a family nonetheless. The next day dragged on endlessly. David went to work but could barely focus. His supervisor noticed and sent him home early. David spent the afternoon pacing while Wraith watched with concerned eyes and Amy tried to distract him with a game. Finally, as evening approached, David's communicator chimed. It was a message from Counselor Finn requesting he report to the evaluation center immediately. David's heart pounded as he made the trip back downtown. Wraith insisted on coming with him. They entered the same conference room where the evaluation had taken place. All three evaluators were there. Finn gestured for them to sit. David Wright. She began, her tone unreadable. We have completed our review of your evaluation performance and home assessment. David held his breath. Your score on the written and oral portions was 87%, which exceeds the minimum requirement of 75%. Your home, while small, meets all safety and basic care standards. Your communication systems are innovative and effective. She paused, and David could not tell if that was good or bad. However, we had concerns about the long-term sustainability of your arrangement. Your financial resources are limited. Your living space is cramped. You are a single parent with existing obligations. David felt his hope beginning to crumble. But, Finn continued, we also observed something we rarely see in these evaluations. We saw genuine care. We saw creative problem solving. We saw a child who has not only accepted Wraith, but has thrived with him present. Most importantly, we saw Wraith himself, who has made more progress in 30 days under your care than most nonverbal individuals make in years of professional therapy. She stood and extended her wing in a formal gesture of respect. You have passed the evaluation, David Wright. The guardianship is approved without restriction. David felt the words wash over him like a wave. He had done it. Against all odds, despite every disadvantage, he had proven himself capable. There is one additional matter, Counselor Tal said. We were so impressed by your communication methods that we would like permission to document them and share them with other caregivers working with nonverbal individuals across multiple species. What you and your therapist friend Bryn have developed could help thousands of beings. David looked at Wraith. The Draconian's eyes were leaking again, tears of relief and joy streaming through his scales. David nodded to the evaluators. Yes, if it helps others, please use whatever we have created. They left the center together, walking out into the evening air. Wraith stopped on the sidewalk and did something David had never seen before. He spread his wings fully, extending them to their complete span. It was a draconian expression of joy, of freedom. People on the street stopped and stared. Some looked afraid. Others looked amazed. David did not care what they thought. His family was complete, and they were going home. 3 months passed like water flowing downhill, each day bringing small victories and occasional struggles. Wraith's transformation was remarkable. The trembling, frightened being who had stood chained in court was gone, replaced by someone who walked with quiet confidence through the spaceport corridors. His work alongside David had become official. The supervisor who had initially objected now openly praised Wraith's abilities. The draconian strength and fire-breathing skills made him invaluable for tasks that would have required specialized equipment. More importantly, his careful attention to detail meant fewer mistakes and safer working conditions. Other workers had gradually accepted him. Some remained distant, but several had made genuine efforts to communicate. A mechanic named Torres learned basic sign language specifically to talk with Wraith during breaks. An engineer named Patel started bringing extra food to share, having learned that Draconians appreciated spicy flavors that most species found overwhelming. The monitoring bracelet still glowed on Wraith's wrist, but it had stopped feeling like a brand of criminality and started feeling like what it was, a temporary precaution that would eventually be removed that take a tea home. The dynamic had settled into comfortable routine. Wraith still slept on the couch, though now it was by choice rather than fear. He had decorated his corner with small items. A drawing Amy made of the 3 of them. A polished stone David found that reminded him of draconian architecture. A certificate from Bryn acknowledging his communication progress. Amy and Wraith had developed their own relationship, separate from David. They shared jokes in sign language that David only sometimes understood. Wraith helped Amy with schoolwork, and she taught him about human culture through movies and books. When other kids at school asked about the dragon who picked her up, Amy spoke about him with fierce pride. But the real change came from an unexpected source. Word of David's guardianship evaluation and the communication systems he developed had spread through the consortium's social services networks. Bryn received requests from therapists and caregivers across multiple planets asking for information. Then came the message that changed everything. It was from an organization called the Coalition for Alternative Communication, a nonprofit that worked with nonverbal individuals across dozens of species. They wanted to feature Wraith's story in their quarterly publication and offered David a position as a consultant. They want to pay me to teach others what we figured out. David asked Bryn over a video call, not quite believing it. Not just teach. They want you to help develop standardized protocols for cross-species communication accommodation. David, what you did was not just save Wraith. You created a model that could help thousands of beings who have been failed by systems that never consider their needs. David looked over at Wraith, who was helping Amy build something complicated out of blocks on the floor. I just did what made sense. Exactly. And that is why it works. You approached it with empathy and creativity instead of rigid policy. That is what they want to replicate. David accepted the consulting position, though he kept his maintenance job as well. The extra income meant he could move to a larger apartment, one where Wraith had his own room and Amy did not have to share space with her father. The new place was in a better neighborhood, with higher ceilings and more light. Wraith spent an entire afternoon just standing in his room with his wings spread, marveling at having space that was truly his. But the most profound moment came when a representative from the Draconian homeworld contacted them. The message was formal, delivered through official channels, requesting permission to meet with Wraith. David was immediately suspicious. Your people cast him out. What do they want now? The representative, an elder Draconian named Shun, arrived at their apartment 2 days later. She was imposing, with deep burgundy scales and wings that spoke of age and authority. She looked at Wraith for a long moment before speaking. I am here because your story reached our world, she said, her voice carrying harmonics that Wraith could never produce. It has caused significant discussion among our people. We have had a custom, an old and cruel one, of abandoning those born without voice. We called it mercy, claimed they could not survive. You have proven that lie. Wraith stood very still, his tablet clutched in his claws. Shun continued. I cannot undo what was done to you. I cannot return the years you spent alone and afraid. But I can tell you that our council has voted to end the practice of abandonment. We are establishing programs to support nonverbal draconians, using the methods developed here as a foundation. Because of you, no other hatchling will be thrown away for being different. She reached in her robe and pulled out a small medallion on a chain. This is a symbol of the council's recognition. It marks you as a full member of Draconian society, with all rights and honors restored. You are no longer cast out. You are claimed. Wraith took the medallion with shaking hands. He looked at it, then at Shun, then at David. His tablet remained dark. There were no words for what he was feeling. Shun bowed, a gesture of deep respect. If you ever wish to visit our homeworld, you'll be welcomed. We have much to learn from you about adaptation and perseverance. After she left, Wraith sat on the couch for a long time, holding the medallion. Amy sat beside him, not signing, just being present. David gave them space, understanding that some moments needed silence. Eventually, Wraith looked up and activated his tablet. The message he typed was simple. I have 2 homes now. David smiled. Yes, you do. The following weeks brought more changes. A documentary crew requested permission to film Wraith's daily life for an educational program about disability accommodation across species. A university offered Wraith a scholarship to study mechanical engineering, recognizing his natural aptitude. The monitoring bracelet was officially removed after a review determined it was no longer necessary. But perhaps the most meaningful change was the quietest one. Other nonverbal beings started appearing at the spaceport, seeking Wraith out. A young alien who communicated through color changes. An elderly being whose species used scent. An adolescent who had lost their voice to injury. Wraith met with each of them, sharing his tablet, teaching signs, offering the simple gift of being understood by someone who understood what it meant to be unheard. David watched him become a mentor, a role model, a proof that silence was not the same as having nothing to say. One evening, nearly 6 months after the trial, David found Wraith and Amy in the living room working on a project together. They had built an elaborate model of the spaceport out of various materials, complete with tiny figures representing the workers. What is this? David signed. Amy grinned and pointed to Wraith, who activated his tablet. It is for my engineering class. We had to design something that improved accessibility. I am proposing modifications to the spaceport to make it easier for nonverbal workers to communicate with each other and with emergency services. Amy is helping me with the visual presentation. David looked at the model, seeing visual alert systems, tactile communication panels, and designated quiet zones for species overwhelmed by noise. It was brilliant and practical, the kind of thing that could actually be implemented. This is really good, he signed. The professor already said if the proposal is approved, the university will fund the installation and let me oversee it as an internship. Wraith's tablet displayed. I'm going to make things better for others like me. David felt something swell in his chest. Pride, certainly, but also gratitude. Gratitude that he had spoken up in that courtroom. Gratitude that he had taken a chance on someone everyone else had written off. Gratitude that his daughter had a brother who would fight to make the galaxy more just. You already have, David said aloud, knowing Wraith would red his lips. You already have. That night, after Amy had gone to bed, David and Wraith sat together on the balcony of their new apartment. The city sprawled below them, lights twinkling in the darkness. Ships came and went from the spaceport, carrying beings to and from countless worlds. Wraith pulled out his tablet and typed a message, then showed it to David. That day in court, when you stood up for me, why did you do it? You did not know me. You had no reason to risk everything. David thought about his answer carefully. I didn't know you. Maybe not your name or your story, but I knew what it felt like to watch someone be dismissed because they were different. I knew what it meant to fight for someone to be seen as complete when the world insisted they were broken. And I knew that if I stayed silent, I would have to explain to my daughter why I did nothing when I could have done something. He paused, looking out at the city. Also, I saw you trembling under that shock prod, unable to even cry out in pain, and I got angry. Really angry. At a system that could be that cruel and call it justice. Wraith's claws tapped a gentle rhythm on the armrest of his chair, a drumming pattern David had learned meant affection and gratitude. You gave me my life back, Wraith's tablet said. You gave me a family. You taught me that silence does not mean powerless. David reached over and placed his hand on Wraith's shoulder, the same gesture the Draconian had used that first day. You did that yourself. I just opened the door. You walked through it. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the ships rise into the night sky. Somewhere in the city, other beings were learning to communicate in new ways. Somewhere, policies were changing because someone had proven they needed to change. Somewhere, a young Draconian would not be abandoned because Wraith had survived and thrived. The courtroom that had tried to silence him was distant now, its power broken. In its place was something stronger, a family built on choice, a community growing through connection, and a future that belonged to beings brave enough to demand it. Wraith stood and spread his wings, stretching them in the cool night air. The gesture was no longer one of desperate joy, but of simple contentment. He was home. He was heard. He was whole. And he had learned that sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is refuse to let the world tell you who you are allowed to be. Inside, Amy's drawing hung on the wall. 3 figures holding hands, one small, one medium, one with wings. Underneath, in her careful handwriting, were 3 words that captured everything that mattered. Our family. Together. David looked at those words and smiled. The galaxy had tried to throw Wraith away, but it had not counted on one thing. A human dad who refused to let someone fall silent when they had so much to say. And that had made all the difference to Indy.